Well, good afternoon again, and thank you for having me for this discussion. Uh, what I'm going to talk about, as Chris mentioned, is the situation in India, the opportunities and challenges associated with building what is absolutely a vast human capital base. And most people know the broad story, second place favorite for a number of years in terms of Western businesses and the business press, billion people, abject poverty, old civilization and economic growth and all that good stuff. But the stuff that I want to really focus on is just one aspect, which is over the next, pick a number, 10 to 30 years, what's going to be the productive job opportunity story for this population? And I'm going to start with after Wolfgang's presentation is really a 101 version of the demographic story. Because certainly, we've already seen the charts and, much more details, which I'm going to, get access to immediately after this session. But, the basic number, which is inescapable, is that every year for the next 10 years, India is going to have 12 million people who are going to become of working age. And the, issue really is that, the optimists can keep talking about the demographic dividend, and as you'll see on the left-hand side, the working age population will continue to grow till 2050. But the issue is, what will they do? Because the sort of economic growth that India has had, it's not really added to the employment opportunities. And B, the sort of people who are coming into the workforce are actually not skilled, either through the formal or through the informal sector, to actually become sustainable, productive members of the workforce. So it's both the absence of the the absence of the right sort of workers, as well as the right sort of firms in terms of employment opportunities. And that's what I wanted to talk about next, which is that the entire India growth story over the last about 20 years now, give or take a few years, has really been about productivity growth. So, while a lot has been talked about and a lot is known in terms of the headline growth story, if you were to de-average it and figure out, what is driving that growth, India has been a capital scarce economy, and it still is a capital scarce economy, which means that at these low bases of capital accumulation, the rewards of innovations aren't, or the investment in innovation aren't actually as widespread or as intensive as they should be. Labor actually has been a smaller part of the growth story than it should have been. And the question really is that for how long can the growth be sustained without an increase in labor, both quantity as well as quality, going forward in this growth story? So, before I move forward, one of the themes of this conversation really is what's the implication for Spain or the developed world, etc. My submission would be actually that at least in India, the issues or problems internally are big enough that India's labor excess or labor supply excess is absolutely not going to be a major issue for anyone else but ourselves. So that's the first point that I wanted to make as we think about the implications going forward. And this is really, again, Wolfgang's presentation has de-averaged and shown what the issues really are with respect to education. And he talked about the stock and the fact that the stock moves very slowly. And the data which, when I did some work recently for Planning Commission in India, which is really scary, is that right now the average school-going age, or the average time spent at school, is about 5.2 years for the Indian workforce. If we were to take a labor-intensive view of growth over the next 10 years only, that average has to improve. And that average has to improve for a labor-intensive growth model by, pick a number between 1 and 1.5 years. So from 5.2 years to 6.2 or 6.7. The problem, though, is that given the momentum that Wolfgang was talking about, in the last 10 years, it took us 10 years to move that average by 1. So it used to be 4.2, it's now 5.2. China did it faster, but China also took 5.2 years, and we do not have the, let's just call it governance elbow room that China has with its system. I won't trade that for what we have today, but it's a factor to be considered. This chart really which talks about who defines skills, both from a provider, i.e. the education institutions, formal or otherwise, and the employers, that shows up the stark difference. The only solace I take on this slide is actually that, US, India, Mexico, and Brazil are in the same cohort. So I don't know how much of this data is actually reality versus perception in terms of, the skill gaps, and whether some of the informal education opportunities can make a difference in terms of bridging this gap. So what we ended up working with the government in form of planning commission is really talking about, at one level, the first story that we have to settle on is what's going to be the model of growth or the source of competitive advantage for the economy. Is it going to be high value addition? Because that's what gets the headlines and that's what's more sexy in terms of talking about. Or is it going to be low labor cost? Can we afford to remain on the right-hand side of this axis when actually the resource supply is a lot more towards the left-hand side? And independent of where one lands on, and just one caveat, it's a country of 1 billion plus people, it's a large country, so you are not going to find exactly one model to describe the entire country, but the heft of the economic growth going forward has to be somewhere on this axis, whether towards the left or the right end. The second issue really is about what actions we end up taking about skilling labor. The fact of the matter is that till now, it's really been incremental and sporadic, by which I mean that sporadic as in, it depends on which industry is the flavor of the day, which company is actually the most acute, facing the problem most acutely, and they are the ones who are going to be doing stuff around skilling labor. Whether the future remains similar or not is an open question, because if it does, then there's no way in which the 12 million per annum workforce is going to be absorbed. And the fact is that today, all four scenarios are possible. If we just leave it as things are, with a bulk of the economic advantage coming from low labor cost and the skilling remaining as it is in terms of incremental and sporadic, then frankly, we are looking at substantial industrial unrest. There's some estimate which talk about 85 million jobs because of China's aging population as well as rising wages. 85 million jobs in manufacturing shifting out of China. Whether they land up in India or elsewhere is a question mark. But even if some part of that comes to India and we remain in this quadrant, it's a given that we are going to go back to a situation of militancy in terms of labor and a deeper social unrest that's going to follow. If we move towards a higher value-added model, which we have in a number of industries, whether it's in automobiles or in information technology or some of that, but we do not do anything in terms of the skilling labor, it's really going to be an issue of paradise lost, in which really the labor versus machine conflict or kind of tension is going to remain. This is not a hypothetical. This is actually already happening. In Suzuki's largest car plant in India, so India is now Suzuki's largest car market in the world, there have been significant issues around what the next wave of investment is going to be and how much of robotics is going to be permitted by the labor unions in terms of the next wave of capacity addition. Of course, even when you move up and in half measure by enlightened action by the government and in half measure, as someone was saying, by luck, if we do get to widespread and collective action in terms of skilling labor, there's still an issue around what type of economic growth model that India ends up with. If it's modern times where some outcomes on fair treatment of labor as well as industrial relation do happen, manufacturing sector may remain characterized by low skills, but that's a future that one can live with, because at least the workforce that's entering the population that's entering the workforce, we will be able to give them a pathway towards a genuine middle-class life. And of course, if we can get to, what the Chinese premier has called the harmonious society, that's going to be the best of all worlds. But as I said, the issue in India is which of these quadrants will the heft of the economy land onto. Now, we are working with the Planning Commission and the Government of India to really move the dialogue and the action north. But A, it's going to take time, and B, it's actually going to take concerted action, not just from the government, but from a number of other stakeholders, including individual firms and industry association. The problem is that right now the dialogue is stuck in a very adversarial story of, which for some of you who may have read the recent Economist article, it's stuck between, oh, you are not reforming labor laws, versus, oh, you're actually not treating labor fairly. And that adversarial conversation is not going anywhere. It's literally been the same dialogue for the last 8 to 10 years. And breaking that logjam is one of the biggest tasks that the government has. I may just add one point here, which is to say that it's not just a question of quantity and quality of the labor force and the economic outcomes. There's a number of things such as internal migration, rising aspiration, because frankly people, even in the bottom end of the labor force now actually understand what different types of jobs are available and are unwilling to do some of the activities which, for example, in the construction industry, which in just 5 years ago would have been absolutely acceptable job opportunities for them. So the question really is that while there's a number of individual as well as collective initiatives that have started, and I've put some logos up here just to talk about a few examples. So Maruti Suzuki, a car company, which is really investing heavily in terms of scaling labor, not just for its own use, but for other industrial activities. Or L&T, which is a construction major, which are individual firm-level initiatives, a few thousands to 10,000 people every year being trained after having dropped out of school or having done school only up till class 6. From there to people like NASSCOM, which is the industry body for the software companies, or the Wind Energy Association. All of these are really right now all put together, not yielding more than 100,000 to 300,000, pick any number between that, in terms of the finishing of the scaling opportunities that's available to the population. Now, put that 200, let's pick 300,000, which is at the upper end. Put that number against the 12 million that's coming into the workforce every year, and you can understand why, to use Wolfgang's 3 projections, if I had to put money, I'd put it on the pessimistic future for today than the optimistic one. So our story really is about whether we can change the paradigm of this conversation from adversarial to something which is constructive, and then be able to provide meaningful jobs, not security guards, meaningful jobs to 12 million or thereabouts of our citizens every year. That's all I had today, and look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.